Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is CHAINge, AI, and the future of freight with my friend Bart de Muynck. How's it going, Bart?
It's going wonderful, Joe. How are you?
Doing great. I'm excited to talk to you. We were blabbing for way too long. You just pointed out that we had to hit the record button or we'd never get this done. So, Bart, please introduce yourself. And I'll say companies, because you have a company and then you're an advisor and you wear a lot of hats. Please introduce all the hats you're wearing.
Sure. Good to see everyone on the podcast, and thanks for having me on again. It's always great to have conversations with you. And like you said, we had to push record because we could have talked for days, right? But that's also showing how interesting supply chain really has become. And I'm currently an advisor. I've been in the industry now for over 33 years. I've started in Europe. I think some people know that I'm originally from Belgium. That's what explains this sometimes very funny accent that people hear. But really started on with companies like EY and General Electric, and then really got into logistics when we started a company, Penske Logistics, which was a joint venture between GE Capital and Penske Logistics in the US. Really learned the ropes from a finance perspective and operations perspective, both in transportation as well as in warehousing. Then moved on to a couple of startup tech companies in the early 2000s, moved to the US meantime, started working for PepsiCo, probably familiar to many of you as a top supply chain company and manufacturer in the food and beverage industry, was there 10 years. And I spent 8 years with Gartner as a research analyst, VP of Supply Chain Technology Research. And then I spent 2 years with Project 44 as an executive. And so what I really try and do, Joe, is combine all of those different experiences I've had from the 3PL and operations side, from the shipper side, from the Gartner research side, from the tech side, to help companies from startup to larger established companies, to help them with a lot of things around what's really the real value creating, how do you message that to customers, create thought leadership. I also help them with access to funding. So I work with a lot of venture capital companies. I advise them a lot as well around the landscape, around specific companies. And in general, I also do industries, a lot of industry events where I speak. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm also the chair for the CHAINge event, which is both happening in Europe as in North America. And then I'm the vice chair for T-Fest, which is an event that's happening in November in Berlin. So couple of different hats, but I really try to use the tools that I've gathered through my own career in logistics and supply chain to really help other companies.
Yep. So when did you move to the United States?
That was end of 2003. So this is now my 22nd year. And it really kicked off when my son was born. He was born in Gloucester, England, where I was living at the time. But my wife is originally from Fort Worth, Texas. And when we decided where we wanted to grow our family and where we wanted to really create a career and future for them as well, I had a lot more confidence in the US at the time than going back to my home country of Belgium. So we moved here end of 2003, and I love it. And I think the US is still such a great country of opportunity for myself. I wouldn't be able to create a business as I have today, maybe in other countries around the world. I don't think people always understand that in the US, how good we still have it here. But I think also for my kids, I'm able to give them and they can create a lot better opportunity and future for themselves with the tools that we have available here in the US.
Right. So we know what you like about the US, besides the women and the business environment. What, besides friends and family, what do you miss the most about Belgium?
Sometimes the food, and obviously, like you said, family and friends foremost, right? Food, although I will say here in the US, there are French style food is kind of what the Belgian food is like as well. Plenty of opportunities to do that, whether you go to Vegas, where I'm at for a lot of conferences, or the DC area or New York. So no shortage there. So it's family and friends. And I think as we all get a little bit older, that's what you miss most, right? Sometimes like on a day like a Friday night, I wish I could go and grab a beer with my pal. It's a little bit harder when you're 5,000 miles away from each other. But I love it here too much to say that I miss much of the other thing.
Have you taught your Texas wife how to make French food without barbecuing it.
Luckily, she's not too big on barbecue, right? I mean, but she loves fast food. She loves Mexican food. She's half Hispanic, half Native
All
American
right.
Indian.
All right.
But I do all the cooking, so I kind of have control over that, Joe. I can cook whatever I want, and most of the time they like it.
I like it. I like it. So you mentioned the CHAINge conference. So the title of today's podcast is CHAINge AI and the Future of Freight with my friend Bart Muynck. But CHAINge is spelled CHAINGE. So like supply chain, but also change. Talk about that conference.
Yeah. So as you said, Joe, it's called CHAINge. It was a rebranding this year that was done. So it's the original ASCM Connect conference, which was the conference for the members of ASCM. For those who don't know it, it's the Association for Supply Chain Management, one of the largest associations within supply chain. And if even that name doesn't ring a bell, you might have known it previously as APIX. And if that doesn't ring a bell, you probably have heard of the SCORE model, which is kind of the basic process model for anyone that's in supply chain, anyone that has a company that kind of follows the digital or the regular SCORE model, which now there is a digital circular version of that as we've progressed with how supply chains work. And so the whole goal was to expand the ASCM Connect conference from more of a membership conference to really a industry platform where members as well as non-members can join. We just had a very successful first launch of that in Europe, in Brussels, Belgium, so my home country, just this past June, where we had incredible conversations around all the top topics that we see in supply chain. And then we have the North American version coming up in Columbus, Ohio, in the beginning of September 9th and 10th.
September 9th and 10th. Not too bad. That's beautiful weather in the Midwest that time of year. And there's football down there in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know if anyone's aware of that. Anyway, I'm a Wolverine, so it's kind
okay. Yeah.
begrudgingly. So what kind of makes, there's so many conferences now. And I always say this, you go to a conference, it's like going to a reunion, you see all your friends, you learn a lot, and you come back and you kind of sort through all your new contacts and you go, I'm never going to miss that conference again. But then every year there's 30 conferences we could all go to. And I know they're all starting to niche. So is there something you would say that makes this change different? Well, but for the one thing that's different is it's in the Midwest. I love the idea that you can drive. There's a lot of us here in the Midwest. This is still a big manufacturing hub. But even if you're in the South, you're not too far from Columbus.
Yeah, I think that what's different, Joe, is really the approach. And when I was kind of considered as a chair all night at the interviews with the company, I said, well, I don't want to be a chair of just any conference. I had been a chair before. I had experience of being a chair of the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium for 4 years. And I'd done some conferences even before Gartner. But what I was really intrigued by is they kind of gave me a blank slate and said, Bart, we want you to create the agenda. And my view was always, how do we create an event that's truly an industry event by the industry for the industry, where it's not either vendor led or it's not led because we want to sell, kind of licenses or memberships or whatever, but really where we're trying to bring everyone in different roles, not just the top people, but even lower operational level people from any industry, and really bring them together to learn, to educate them, but also education through collaboration. And then obviously technology and the innovation part takes part of that as well. And so we structured the agenda where we have some really incredible speakers. One of them is Gina Raimondo, who's the previous Secretary of Commerce for the United States, who is doing one of the keynotes. So we're going to have very high-level people that are going to come and give some key presentations. But then we have a lot of panels where we have multiple people, whether it's academics, people from the industry, people related to the industry, that can talk about the main topics. And again, the main topic isn't, as some conferences, AI. It's really around what's happening around tariffs, what's happening around talent in the industry, what's really happening around overall disruptions, what's happening in the world out there around other things like sustainability. So we really looked at what are some of the top things that the companies are focused on or even the employees care about. And those are the topics. And then the other things we're doing is we're having kind of more track sessions, but then very interactive sessions. We do, for example, roundtables about all these different topics where really you're not just an attendee, but you become part of the conversation. You become part of the content. And I think that's what ASCM has always been known about as well, is how do we really educate, not just by giving you the information, but also about sharing our own successes and maybe sometimes our failures and educate each other. And that's something we saw being very successful in Brussels, where we had these roundtables. We had to really pull the people away from their chairs to come back to the main sessions because we had such vivid conversation and everyone has opinions. But I think it's very powerful if you're in an environment where you feel comfortable sharing the information and where you can truly learn from each other and walk away with something that says, hey, you know what? I learned something that I can actually apply. So the goal is not for everyone to walk away with a goodie bag, with a new water bottle and a t-shirt from a vendor, but really walk away with something that's very applicable, knowledge that they can use or contacts from a network that they can use to go back to their role in their organization and say, hey, I can apply this. And by the way, CHAINge, although the main events are the North America, the European events, it's a program year round where we do webinars and other things to continue education because that's not just a one-time thing. It's a continuous thing.
I love it. I love it. You know, when you say supply chain, that implies that we're going to get the big CPGs that you're familiar with, that where you worked at Pepsi. You're going to get the big automotive companies. You're going to get, I always say that I think there's like 13 logistics segments in supply chain. So one might be retail, one might be automotive, industrial. There's all these different segments, but one of the challenges sometimes is people say, I'm going to that conference to win business. And then if it's just over the road, you don't have enough shippers show up. And you don't just go to conferences just to win business, but that's a very nice thing. But I also want to be exposed to something beyond what we do and what my competition is doing. And I think supply chains are looking for flow from order to cash. We talked about this before we hit the record button. And, you know, the over-the-road part, super important, but I think it's really important that all of us who are in logistics, whether it's warehousing or transportation, technology, that we become more part of the supply chain. Because in a lot of times you hear people go, logistics and supply chain. You could ask, why is it separate? Aren't we, you don't say procurement and supply chain.
Yeah, logistics is a part of the overall supply chain. It's not separate from it.
Well, we say it separately.
And I think maybe because logistics has been around longer than supply chain. So before there was supply chain, people talked about logistics. Now logistics is part of supply chain, right? So I think that that's part of it. But no, you're absolutely right. For example, we had the Port of Antwerp Bruges as part of our speakers in European event. Incredibly powerful conversations because really, if you look at the ports, they're the ones that, and there's not that many huge ports around the world. So they control a very high percentage of global trade. And as you know, more than 90% of any product around the world goes through ocean and goes through one of those ports. And so seeing that as kind of those main arteries where products are going through, whether they're coming in or they're going out, having those people in the conversation together with obviously the over-the-road part, whether that's rail or that's full truckload, or that's LTL, really bring everyone on the table because we really want to talk about supply chain as a complete thing end to end. And I realize that a lot of companies that still might be mainly functional silos, but we're really addressing it at the conference from an end-to-end perspective. So we understand that if something happens in logistics, what is that impact or what is the opportunity we can provide, for example, to supply chain planning? How can we bridge some of those gaps and some of those silos between the functions within a single organizations, but also create a better ecosystem across organization and even get companies to, converse themselves, because obviously, as you know as well, in supply chain, you have a lot of different tiers in the supply chain. So a lot of companies out of other industries might be suppliers to your industry, right? Or I spent quite a few years in the chemical industry where a lot of buyers and sellers were buying and selling to or from other chemical companies because it's very much layered. One of your finished products might be a raw material for the next chemical company to create new products of.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And again, I do think when we say supply chain, it means we're going to get the entirety of it, which we all need. And by the way, I'm not against the conferences that are out there that are just over the road. There's value to all of them. Again, every conference I go to these days, I come back and say, I'm never going to miss that one again. And then I know I'm going to, because I can't go to conference every week. I mean, I know you do, Bart, but no one else
Well,
does.
I've slowed it down because I'm with you. I mean, there's a couple out there that are, and I think people know who they are, and where you get a lot of value, right? But I think people, we see it as well. People don't have time to go to a lot of conferences, right? I mean, we're all fighting fires in organizations, supply chains. And if there wasn't a fire yet, there's a new fire this week, right? We continuously see new disruptions, or tariffs are getting thrown on us, new tariffs, or they're reducing existing tariffs, or whatever is happening. There's always something new every day, every week. And so I think people really are more selective to the conferences they're going. Even the vendors, right? They might have in the past sponsored a lot of these events. Now they're going like, which are the ones where truly shippers are coming to and where we want to spend our money. So you have to be very much like, I think it's still like anything. It's like you have to look at the audience and you want to get the shippers there. So that's how we build the content, not to please a vendor, to really get the shippers there. And if you get the shippers, then I think automatically the sponsors and the vendors will come because they want to have the opportunity to be part of the conversation. And by the way, we're doing things like innovation showcases. And obviously that's with technology companies, but really the goal as well is not just to have them on stage and just market them. Really, the goal is to open the eyes of some of the companies to what is there from kind of newer technology that might be applicable to your business, to your industry. And so that's part of education as well, is showing real use cases of powerful innovation. We do that through the innovation showcase. We also do that through what we call use case theaters, where it's people coming in and talk about real use cases. Now that can be around strategy, can be around sustainability, but also what are some real things they did when, for example, implementing a certain new technology.
I love it. I love it. And since there's going to be shippers, you just mentioned there'll be a lot of shippers there. I always call that like it's the ladies' night. In fact, if you have a ladies' night at your nightclub, pretty much sure you're going to get plenty of dudes showing up. so
we do have a women in supply chain breakfast panel, which was again very interesting in Europe. I'm glad to see we're seeing more and more ladies in supply chain. I've been fortunate to work for companies like PepsiCo, where we had with Indra Nooyi a female CEO. And I will say some of the companies I've worked with, some of my best colleagues and I would say the best performing people in supply chains are often women. And so I'm very happy to see that also when you work with universities, there's a lot of ladies that are studying supply chain. So I think we're in a good place, and it's all about talent, right? It's not about having men or women, whatever that is, but having really strong talent and people with interest. And that's something I think, Joe, when we started in supply chain or in logistics, we definitely didn't see, well, there wasn't studies in it. You couldn't study it. I studied economics. There was no supply chain back then. But now there's a lot of interest in it. And I think it's a lot more going that way. And I hope that one day it'll be like in a lot of other industries or a lot of different roles where it's much more diverse than what we see today.
Any industry that, for whatever reason, doesn't have a lot of men, if it's a primarily female or primarily male, you'll notice there's shortages. So we always talk about a truck driver shortage. I think that's a utilization problem, but women don't go into trucking because not to the extent that we'd like, because it's a difficult job. Usually women want to focus more on the family. They don't want to be sleeping in their truck in a potentially dangerous place. But we've seen it also in nursing in the past. We didn't see enough guys go into nursing, so there's always a shortage. So I think just making women aware that this is a career path, and you're right. I started my career in automotive, which is an automotive supply chain, I guess. And I remember somebody saying to me, we're looking for a really good supply chain guy. And I didn't recognize myself as a really good supply chain guy because I didn't know what a supply chain was. I knew what a supply was. I knew what a chain was, but anyway. So are you still looking for sponsors for this event? And are people still able to get tickets to this?
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's just under 2 months away, but yeah, definitely you're still looking for people both to register as attendees, but it's still open to sponsorships as well. It's good to see that there's a lot of interest out there. But again, I think the more people you can put together, and it's at the convention center in Columbus, Ohio, so there's plenty of space there. I think the value is also is like bringing people together from, as much of a diverse from an industry perspective background. And you'll see shippers there from all over the world. You'll see vendors there from all over the world. You'll see consultancy companies. You'll see academics there. And really, the goal is to have as rich a conversation as we can.
So that is Columbus, Ohio is where Ohio State's at. They have an excellent supply chain management program there. In fact, I think is it Esper, the guy was just in charge of CSCMP. I think he was the president of CSC or whatever the head guy is for the civilians. It's also a college town. All college towns are great. September is a wonderful time to visit the Midwest. And if you Google right now, Anduril, the defense company, they just announced a massive investment in Columbus, Ohio. So the next generation of defense is going to be built there. So this is, and if you look at this area, it is still, I think, probably second now to China in manufacturing, but the Rust Belt is alive and well and building cool stuff.
Yeah, very true.
So you started to touch on talent. When I asked you what you wanted to talk about today, you said talent, not AI. I know we're going to talk about AI in a minute, but what's on your mind there?
Yeah, I think the reason why I have big passion for the talent topic is because there's so much discussion around technology. And don't get me wrong, I love technology. I love technology when it comes to work. If you come to my house, everything is technology. I have all the bells and whistles. So I really love it. And I started using a computer at the age of 12, which now you go like you're late to the game. I think when we were young, right, I just turned 56. When you had a computer at 12, you were like a pioneer in that area.
You were a geek.
But I will say the problem nowadays I find is a little bit that there's over focus on the technology part, and there's just not been enough focus on the talent part. And so while we're kind of looking at things like AI, we often have forgotten that we didn't train our people, right? We really haven't upskilled them. And so we haven't been able to empower them. And so there's a lot of surveys out there that shows that employees are getting frustrated because of that lack of training, because of lack of engagement. And it's also why a lot of people often leave their companies. And if you look, there is a talent war going on because we know it's not just the aging population, but it's also people are very picky, especially younger people, where they want to go work. And we saw during COVID, there was this big exodus, right? These people that left. And I talked to a lot of those people and I go like, so what are you going to do next? They said, I don't know. And personally, Joe, I would never leave a company if I didn't have a job lined up after it. But they left. They just left to leave. And that's something that companies from a culture perspective, right? And I had the discussion at the CSCMP event in Europe on the exact topic. And we had one of the top guys from a company called Iveco out there. And he said, a lot of it really has to do with creating the right culture. But I think that's why this talent, supply chain still, humans are centric to it, right? We might try and say, well, we're going to automate everything and we need less people. No, we don't. We already have a shortage of people. That's the ideal. And traveling around the world, I've never heard a single supply chain guy say when it comes to certain roles, like we have too many people, right? It's always we have a shortage of people. So they have a shortage of people in the warehouse, right? And that gap we're filling with robots. We're not replacing people with the robots. There's already an existing gap that we're filling. And then in the office, either we're all fighting for the same talent, because when I started, you either did studies and then you went to go work for a manufacturer, or you did a different study, you go work for a technology company, or maybe you did another study, you go work for a logistics company. Now that same resource that studies supply chains has their pick. You can go work for any type of company. So manufacturers, 3PLs, technology companies, they're all looking after that same talent. So that's one part. And then the other part is we're seeing a lot of companies where someone retires, someone leaves for another company. That role doesn't get backfilled. So how do you help these people? You help them adding the technology that helps them do their job better, to handle more volume, to do it better. And that also is then related at the end of the day with talent attraction and retention, because if someone likes their job better, because you're taking some of the stuff away they don't like doing, then you're also going to improve that attraction and retention. And just recently, I was in a product council group with one of my customers, and when talking about AI, they're all kind of like shy, right? And they're all like, I don't really know what it is. Is it coming from my job? And so I asked how many people are using AI, and really hardly anyone raised their hands, although I didn't ask who uses it at work. Then I asked how many people use an iPhone. They all raised their hand. So if you're using an iPhone, you're all using AI. And so the most powerful way of using AI is that you're using something that you know is faster and better, but you're not even realizing you're using AI. And in supply chain, especially in logistics, as you know very well, Joe, we have these, thousands, millions, billions of transactions that go around. So we have people that say, well, I got to do this thing, but I got to do it like 50 times a day. It's not rocket science to automate it. And it's small things, but you would make their life so much better if you can automate it. They go like, oof, don't have to do that anymore. Or we see it in CRMs, right? You get so many emails. Well, 90% of your emails are junk, or the reply could be automated. So if you can automate that and then just focus on the 10% that is really important, where it's you that has to have a personal answer. And by the way, the other 90%, instead of waiting for days as you're going through your mailbox, they get immediate responses. Because how frustrating is it to say, oh, I sent an email to someone and I haven't heard back? So I think we have to focus a little bit differently around how we use technology. And I think from a vendor perspective as well, is when you're looking at a vendor or you are a vendor, you have to look at technology as a way of what is that right intersection of talent and technology. Because if you don't have that right, people are not going to adopt the solution. Started in the 90s, like I said, with GE, I was a Six Sigma black belt. Biggest thing with technology, although technology was a little younger then, was all around change management, right? People refusing to change. We still have that same issue, right? And that's where people go like, oh, AI, it's going to be so different. Well, what if you can do it incrementally and take these things away that today you don't like doing, and gradually do it better and better, as you have to depend more on technology to do things faster, more real time, and then be able for you as a person to handle more volume, because you're maybe now a team of 5, where before you have 15 people to do less than what you do now. And I think we talked a little bit about it earlier. You remember when we all started having computers, right? And we're all saying, oh, the computers are going to take our jobs. Didn't take our jobs. It changed the way we did things, right? I don't think there's a lot of secretaries anymore typing up letters and faxing them. We all use email now. But I think it's really helped us to do things. So
I think with the AI, I heard somebody make this point, and I thought it was an interesting one, is that at least initially, we will be the supervisor and manager of AI. So let's just say I'm in a procurement function, and I say I have 6 different things that I do on my job, workflows, we'll call them. If I can get an AI agent to manage those flows, somebody still has to be, at least initially, checking that. And so somebody has to create those workflows. Somebody has to kind of inform AI. And I kind of think of it as that's a transition, but it's not just going to say, yeah, we got rid of the procurement manager and now it's an AI agent. I'm guessing a little ways away.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joe. Two points.
Someone has to be blamed also.
Yeah, 2 points I'll make around that, right? It's like there's still some very complex things where we have a lot of institutional knowledge, and we're not there yet that AIs can replace that institutional knowledge. And we've seen that even from other industries like the medical field, right? Where they can do all these tests and they can have the computer and AI look at those tests and come up with results. There was one particular article I had read, and it was this person, and basically based on all the data points from all the MRIs, X-rays, whatever, the computer had made a certain recommendation. Well, the person didn't liked the recommendation and went for a second opinion and went to a person, went to a doctor, and doctor says, I can't kind of negate the data points and what the computer came up with, but having been in this field for over 30 years, my gut says that there is something else going on. Well, guess what? In the end, they did the surgery. The doctors were right. So there is this thing of institutional knowledge that we're not there yet. But how do you really give the tools to the people to do that more efficiently? And when you talk about procurement, one great thing that we don't do today that, for example, AI can help with is, for example, in freight procurement, how do we typically do it? We do these bids, right? Where it's annual bids, quarterly bids. But how do we kick that off? We typically kick that off because we're saying, oh, we do our bids in this month, and we're just deciding, oh, on October 15th, we're going to start the new bid. But what if you don't have to do that, and the computer tells you, hey, Joe, rates are changing for ocean transportation. They're actually looking good. I'm going to suggest to you that maybe now you should kick off a bid specifically for ocean rates for this particular region, right? So the value of that alone, making the suggestion, now you as the expert can still say, oh, computer, you're full of it. It's not the right time. Or you can say, wow, I didn't really have time to focus on that because I'm too busy executing my operations. But that's a great idea. Let me go and do that. And by the way, now I have the tools to do that a lot easier. And also, if you're automating, now I can reach out to a lot more carriers than if I have to do that all in a manual fashion. So I think those are a little bit different, is how we can use kind of more prescriptive capabilities rather than pure automating on the execution side. And that's, for example, why data quality is so incredibly important, because data was used for historical analysis. I remember in the 90s with Penske going to GE Plastics, and we were doing an analysis. We're using Cognos, which was brand new at the time. And at the end, a lot of our outcome was wrong because the data quality wasn't there. But it was okay because we were doing historical analysis. Well, now, if you want to start predicting and prescribing things, your data better be correct, because otherwise that prescription is going to be completely off.
Somebody was telling me the other day that they're using AI to clean up and normalize data, which I was like, hallelujah. And somebody said this on my podcast at some point, and I like it. And they said, we're not quite ready for AI yet. We're in an AI readiness phase. And that means we're cleaning up our dirty data. And I think the companies I talk to often say, we have to normalize it. So if you're from Europe and you're using European currency or European languages or European date standards, it's going to be different than the United States, different in Asia. Somebody has to normalize that, and we'll teach our AI to do that fairly easily. But there's things like slang that that one country uses, maybe something that their customs group expects and ours doesn't. But I think that's a beautiful application for AI if we can say we can clean up the dirty data. I've said this many times on my podcast. Every transportation management system I've used, they'll say, Joe, the nice thing about this is you don't have to do like the reports. It just sends out the reports every day or every week. And and I was like, yeah, send them to me first so I can look at them. And then they're never right. And it's never because the technology doesn't allow us to do it. It's because we're humans and we put the wrong information in. And I remember not so long, the last time I did a consulting engagement, I was like, why are there like 80 shipments that cost like $30, $20, and they're not parcel, they're over the road? I'm like, no reason, I don't know. So you just got to cut it out. And I keep thinking the incomplete, the incorrect, the vague, whatever they are, that's what we need. I think we need to kind of push humans to put the right data in. Give me a drop down that doesn't allow me to leave it blank.
No, you're absolutely right. Couldn't be agreeing more with you. It's obviously a less sexy use case, right? Because it happens behind the scenes. But yes, using AI, even large language models to clean up data, to look, is the data complete? Is it accurate, right? And it'll say, like, I've seen 1 million occurrences. This just can't be right. Or, for example, if you're doing, parcel address validation, right? It's a big problem, right? And parcel providers will charge you fees if that address was incorrect. So those are really upfront, easy things to do for AI and creates incredible value. And then it's to normalize the data. I saw that with a large company like PepsiCo, where we were trying to do global metrics on manufacturing. And then when we looked at it, we go like, every single company around the world or the different regions, we had different definition of the metrics. And to normalize that, that meant we had to change all of the master data. That took us forever to do before we could even start the project. Now you can have AI normalize that. And so it can use data that's come from different standards, from different sources, and kind of normalize that very, very quickly. We see it in even from a data perspective in freight around fraud. There's so much fraud going on right now where it can very easily detect anomalies just coming inbound based on some of the data. So very, very powerful. It's kind of more behind the scenes, but I would definitely say it's one of the top use cases. And I compare it, I have a slide kind of jokingly, not jokingly so much. I have a water purification plant as the picture, because data is a little bit the same. If it goes in a shit and you don't do anything, it goes back out the same way. But that AI can be used to really clean up that data, just like the stuff coming in, it comes out as potable water. That's what we really need to do around data. And why is that so important? We know with the IoT revolution, the last 20 years, we've created so much data, and we're creating more data and doubling the data almost every other year. And also we're generating data with Gen AI. We can generate data where we don't have data points. It can create that data for us. Now, we have to watch out though, Joe, because we know sometimes, we talked about that earlier as well, that, AI or things like ChatGPT just make up stuff, right? Because it wants to please you. It doesn't want to come back and say, I have no answer. So sometimes it'll just make it up. So you got to watch.
I think it learned it from us, Bart.
Yeah, it does. I mean, we programmed it, so it probably has some of our traits, right?
It says that's why the humans don't like to give the boss incomplete answers, so they make stuff up. We'll do the same.
Yeah, correct. So, but no, the data part, incredibly. I always say the data is the lifeblood of the AI.
Yep. So before we hit the record button, we were talking about technology, and I was asking you a little bit about Project 44. And just to set the table here a little bit, Project 44 kind of changed the industry in a big way with visibility. Now I think that Project 44 people would agree there's a lot of different competitions for that. So it's not as if when they say, hey, we can provide visibility, there's a whole bunch of people saying, yeah, we do too. But when it came out, I joke about this, I haven't said it lately, but 50 companies in a row came out on my podcast and said, I want to talk about visibility. and I said, every episode cannot be about visibility. And by the way, you didn't invent it. You got it from Project 44. And by the way, when I was at a 3PL, just prior to that, we would always say, we have real-time visibility. And what I meant by real-time is we're using EDI from the LTL carriers, and real-time is give or take a half an hour behind, right?
Oh, even worse, right? You get 4 hours late, you get an EDI message of something that was delivered 4 hours ago, which, by the way, was 4 hours.
We called it real time. I'm sticking to it. It was real time. But we have a visibility revolution, and I would say in many ways led by Project 44. I think I'm like many others. I heard seeing the rumors. I Googled Project 44, and there was an article by Craig Fuller, and I think he talked to Jet McCandless, and a great leap forward over at Project 44. I know you're still close to the Project 44 folks. Talk about what that innovation is and why we should all be paying close attention to this.
Yeah, and I want to make sure people kind of understand this correctly, right? Because some people will say, well, they call it something different now, and it is something different. It's a natural evolution. So if you look, and I talked about this when I was still at Gartner, is that visibility doesn't happen overnight. I always had it as a 5-stage evolution and maturity model. But it all started obviously with collecting data, and that's how Project 44 started, where they created kind of the super highway for data in the transportation supply chain industry, hence the name Project 44, because there was the reference to Project 44 back in Chicago when they were creating new super highways in the US that were replacing like the Route 66 and the routes back then in the 40s, right? And so you have to build those superhighways first on the API to collect the data. Once you have the data, now you can obviously start looking at the data and creating basic insights, further insights, and then you can start creating really suggestions to companies. So as we are collecting the data, as we're maturing our capability to deal with data, as obviously AI has matured, now we're really at the stage where we can create decisions based on the data. And hence, the evolution comes to the term decision intelligence platform. We're now at the phase where we can create truly decisions and create suggestions around actions to be taken. And so you're doing that natural evolution, which again, you can't do overnight. You can't go from, oh, we got everything in Excel to I'm automating it today. Reality is it doesn't happen overnight. There is a process to it. And that's really behind the whole movement to Project 44, now positioning that as decision intelligence. Also, they developed from kind of more the visibility part to being able to have capabilities around things like TMS, being able to have AI agent that can perform a lot of different functions. We're talking about metrics around sustainability. So as obviously the data has increased and the capabilities and the fact that they can provide a lot more value to companies across the supply chain. Imagine if you know in real time, or you can predict what a lead time can be between China and North America. Imagine what that can do from a supply chain planning perspective, right? When you're doing replenishment planning or procurement planning, you can be a lot more accurate. Now you have real impacts on inventory. And if people ask, why is that? If you look at the most recent State of Logistics report that is being published by CSCMP every year together with Kearney and Penske Logistics, you'll see that again this year, the US logistics costs have gone up over 5%. And although, for example, full truckload costs have come down, other modes have gone up, but inventory holding cost continues to go up, right? Or shippers' administrative costs have gone up. So how do you automate certain parts and get those administrative costs down? How do you become smarter, reduce inventories? Because inventories, I mean, there's trillions of dollars of inventory traveling around the world every day. Massive, massive impacts that we see there. That's really the power of now using that data. And by the way, I think why P44, I truly believe they're the best positions, is no one has more data around the supply chain than they have to be able then turn that into decisions. And then I think what we're still at, and that's more not from a technology perspective, but more from the shipper community perspective, is we haven't yet pulled the trigger on saying, okay, the system is telling me to do a decision, let's execute it. We're still, like you said before, we still have to control that button of saying, let's go do it. We have a person that needs to do it rather than saying, you know what, we can automate at least a part of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. Years ago, I remember I had an employee who worked for me, and he would always send me these Excel spreadsheets, and I would look at it, and so I finally said, "You're asking me to interpret this, and you've already done it." And I said, "What I want is either cut, copy, paste this into a PowerPoint, or at least in the body of the email, say, hey, Joe, check out." Here's what the data suggests. I attach I trust him. If the data suggests things, go ahead, they attach that. I think in a lot of ways, where Project 44 is we gave you all the data you needed to make good decisions. But there's a difference between data and insights, right? Somebody's got to actually come up with those insights, and maybe that's AI can do that now. But it's funny. It's also a difference. You've heard people say there's a difference between information and wisdom. So if you give information to one guy who's maybe inexperienced or foolish, he doesn't come to the same conclusion that I gave it to Bart, and Bart said, "Oh, this is clear as day. We got to do this." Is that kind of what Project 44 is moving us towards?
Exactly. But also, if you can give me the information a lot quicker, a lot faster, and show me, hey, this is something, Bart, you should look at, it allows me to make my decision and act on it a lot quicker than me actually having to go and deep dive for the information. So it's a combination of, one, having the best quality data, having complete data. Secondly, it's having it in real time and in a way that's very easy. That's why you see a lot of these systems now you can interact with instead of having to click through 10 screens and know what you're looking for. You could just talk to it and it'll give you the information back. And then the aspect of it saying, here's some alternatives because I give you all the other information. I can give you all the other metrics that allow you to make the best decision. So let's say something is late, right? Coming in with by container. What's the other source? Do I have the inventory somewhere else in the US? Can I expedite it? Or can I just air freight it? What is the right solution? What is the right thing that has the best impact for my customer, but not an incredibly high cost? And that creates more efficiency in the organization. Having that information at fingertips is so important. And the thing with Excel, by the way, a lot of companies still use Excel spreadsheets, right? It also means that you internally can use an Excel spreadsheet, but you still have the P44 outside because it's a layer on top of your systems. So that's great. But the problem with spreadsheets is you've downloaded that data from somewhere, which means once you download it, it's no longer real-time data.
It's static instead of dynamic.
Yeah. And in today's world, right? 30 years ago, that was fine when I started in supply chain because things didn't move that fast. But today, things change every hour. So you need to really have that latest and greatest information.
Yeah, I think also, I'm going to, this is just me philosophizing a little bit, but this is what we talked about before we hit the record button. I feel like, if you're a shipper, let's just say a supply chain, we're talking about supply chains earlier. So if I'm a shipper, I want to know from the time I get an order to the time I get paid, I kind of want one platform. We have a ton of point systems. We have ERPs, we have WMS, we have order management. We have all these different systems and we've been connecting them. And for a long time, it was difficult to stitch those together. So we had integrations. Now we've made it a little easier with APIs, but I could see a time when there's going to be just one platform. And if I'm talking to Bart and he's over as head of a supply chain of a big company, says, yeah, Joe, we'd like to work with you, plug into our platform. And the idea that you say, you need to use my transportation management system or my warehouse management system. I think right now we could have a system that just says, here's our platform and it maps to all your systems. And then at some point, why do I have your system at all? Because what you worked at PepsiCo, I worked in automotive. We want flow. We want flow in those systems. I don't want to work with a whole bunch of companies that are silos that are an inch wide and a mile deep and don't know what happens upstream or downstream of them. I want a flow from order to cash. And if it's 18 weeks, I want to take it to 16, then 14, then 12. That's how they look at their world. And we're bringing point solutions that I don't think, we have them, but I think we now are seeing with platforms like Project 44, you're starting to say, maybe we don't need all these point systems.
Yeah, the reality of it is, Joe, that a lot of people aren't going to just rip and replace. They're not going to say we're going to do away with all these systems, right? So the question becomes more, how do you work together with these existing systems? Now, maybe some of them over time you can replace or no longer need it. A lot of them will still be there. And sometimes they're very, very old applications, right? We talked earlier, still a lot of AS400 out there. But having the ability as a platform like a P44 to go in there very easily and pull the data out, now present them in an end-to-end layer that you say, even by being handicapped or maybe not having the ability to do that internally because your systems are so segregated and because you have so many different systems, to have that kind of one kind of book of record that can pull it all together and not just give you the insight across the supply chain, but it'll also give you those things that you can then go and execute again in maybe your execution platform. So it feeds the information back as well to go and execute it. Again, that's one thing you hear a lot from companies that don't have a desire to go just and rip and replace. And you see some companies are doing that right now with larger systems. For example, SAP, people go from R3 to S4 HANA. They're huge, huge projects. They take many, many years. But at the same time, it gives the opportunity for other systems like a P44 to come in and say, we need these other solutions that can come in very quickly and create value now. Because if all my technology projects are taking 2, 3, 4, 5 years to pay off, That's not going to work either. And I think that's where the capability of some of these vendors come into to very quickly create incredible value. And by the way, it lives in an ecosystem together with your existing applications. And then you can go and continuously extend the value you can provide across the supply chain.
So do you see Project 44 as kind of would their customer become the shipper at that point? And then are they acting as more than the visibility platform at that point? What else are they? So they're giving me decisions. Are you seeing it as other systems map to that? I'm just trying to explain. I'm trying to understand how they fit.
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, obviously, shippers are the main customers, although they have 3PLs using it as well. They have carriers using it. They have over 2,000 shippers, the largest companies in the world, using it. But yes, what you will see is more and more, it's not just used for visibility, it's used really for decision intelligence and decision execution. And then what you will see is that it will go from supply chain planning all the way down to transportation. So it's not just focused around the transportation itself, but how do you help supply chain planning making better decisions? It's SNOP, it's SNOE, it's supply chain planning. That's where it's really going towards. And again, don't get me wrong, it's not like we got it all figured out or everyone's using it that way. But that's really the goal, is to help across that end-to-end supply chain by providing the right data at the right time to the right person. And if you have that from a system that's not functional, meaning they're not just transportation, they're not just planning, then it doesn't matter if your company is siloed or not, because the system, based on the data, can see across. We as humans don't do that. And I will say sometimes that's what technology has created, is more silos, because back in the day in the 90s, when I didn't know something, I would go across the hall and go talk to that person. We don't no longer have that capability because we're depending on technology to do that. But if your solution is only focused on your functional silo, how do you do that, right? That's where we see really these layers on top that can provide that capability. And again, it's all about symbiosis. How do you leverage your existing investments in technology, but even create more value by adding solutions like Project 44?
Bart, years ago, when I was an automotive guy, and I came and I was at a little third-party logistics company, and I remember thinking, I was the general manager, COO, it was a smaller company. I really loved it there. We did great work. We did mostly less than truckload. But I used to ask the owner, why do people work with us? Why don't they go directly to the LTL companies? And he said, well, because they don't know how to negotiate rates. They need extra hand holding. They don't have a TMS, that would work for all the LTL companies. And I was like, okay. So we were adding value in the middle, and I get that. I heard recently that freight brokers went from 14 to 16% margin down to 12% recently. And what I've thought then, and I've said it on my podcast, and then I later on said I was wrong. I said I thought the number of freight brokerages would reduce. So we had, at the peak during COVID, 31,000, according to our friend Kevin Hill. Now I think we're down to 25,000. We didn't lose very many the last few months. So, and by the way, I'm not wishing anybody ill will here. I don't want anyone to go out of business. I've been part of that. It's no fun. But I could see a platform like this starting to reduce the need for the traditional, I'll get you a truck. And now here's how I said this at Manifest, everyone I was talking to. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, somebody says, I hired Bart to get me a truck. And then not so long ago, I hired Bart to get me a truck and provide me technology, which was a TMS, visibility, whatever else. And now I hire Bart to get me a truck, bring me the technology, and bring me analytics and insights that makes my business run better, not just getting me a truck. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of this work move to the AI, and I could see there being less need for as many freight brokerages, and I can see the services changing. And I'll throw this out there to anybody who's listening. Don't think of yourself as a freight broker. If you're working in cold chain, become a cold chain expert. So you say, my next job might be at Kroger. If you're going to be an automotive logistics guy, get a job in automotive one day. So you're not just a freight broker. I think niching is important as we go forward because you don't know what AI is going to take over. I can speculate, but it's not going to cost me my job.
Yeah, I will say just on the P44 side, right? Just to call out, I mean, a lot of 3PLs and some brokerages use a Project 44, so it's definitely not there to replace that. It's definitely there to be able to work better together with the shipper, with the existing 3PLs, and create efficiencies for both sides. That's really the goal. Now, brokerage, again, if you looked, it's not only more brokerage, but brokerage used to be 5% of freight. And now it's like, it's grown so much, right? Now it's over 15%. So it also depends on the market. When the market is, traditionally shippers just want to work with contracted carriers. But when they can't find the capacity or something else going on, they go through brokerages, right? Plus, the brokerages now have so much more insights. They've so much more technology to make it easier to find. Now, the other part is because we haven't used a lot of digital procurement, we're stuck typically with a limited amount of carriers, which also limits the capacity we have access to. Whereas with a broker typically works with so many carriers, you have access to a lot more carriers. And by the way, you don't just work with one broker, you work with multiple brokers. I think the whole idea is, right, just like we use on the consumer side, technology is a way to work with however you work, whether it's direct with a carrier, through a 3PL or a broker, is to make that collaboration technologically easier to work with. And I think that's where Project 44 and platforms like it come together. That's where the technology is used to really make that collaboration a lot better.
Yeah. And by the way, when I originally suggested a long time ago, I've been on the podcast 7.5 years, which long enough for things I said to come back and bite me. I thought we would have fewer freight brokerages, but to your point, there's a larger percentage of freight that's been brokered. Now, during difficult times, you could see that really being the case. During COVID, we could see that being the case.
Well, when the rates were high, right, a lot of people bought a truck and became drivers. And a lot of people started brokerages. But then all of a sudden, when rates were rock bottom, because it's not just like you said, because they're digitizing more, the average margin goes down. But if you're saying a load that used to be 2 years ago was $4,000 and now you're making 15% on that, that's $600. Now that same load is $2,200 and you're making 10%, that's $220. It's completely different economics.
Yeah, I think what I also missed when I originally thought, okay, technology is going to replace freight brokerages. And I didn't think that was a wholesale thing or it would happen overnight. It's a generational thing. But what I missed is that the freight brokerages, the very best ones, invested in the transportation management systems, either their own or off the shelf, that they customize typically. They're the ones who invested in visibility tools like P44, the green screens, and all the killer apps that made the customer experience and the customer success work. And let's face it, if you're a trucking company, only the very biggest ones start to say, we can afford to buy all that other stuff. Usually they're going to invest in more trucks. So it's an interesting thing. I just think it makes sense still to look at it in industry and say, what areas could flatten out? And by the way, I was a CAD guy. I worked on the computer-aided design. There was thousands of us in any engineering program. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of, the computer got better and better and better. And then one day I was working as an engineer many years later. And I said, where's the CAD group that used to be here? They go, oh, it's still here. Except you couldn't see it because it just seemingly disappeared. And so I think, as long as you can add value in the middle, you get to stay. But if there's another platform or technology or AI adding the value you add, you got to look.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like a 3PL and a brokerage, they're really service providers. They provide a lot more than just that introduction to a carrier. And they're using ways to automate that, right? So the question is really, what else are you getting from that provider? And that's really why companies will continue to work with those partners, because also there's, like in automotive you mentioned, right? I mean, a lot of automotive manufacturing work with large 3PLs. Because of the complexity, because of the needs.
Oh, yeah.
You could go like, well, now you have AI. You're going to do it all yourself directly? They won't.
No, it takes a little long. It's funny, the nature of technology. I sometimes say this. who knows if I'm right, but I always say it moves really, really slow until the day it moves really, really fast. and I think about this in my own consumer life. When you get a new phone, it used to be, I'm getting a new phone. It's a wasted day. I will be at Verizon from sun up till sundown while they do their magic of getting me a new phone. Now it's like, oh, I got a new phone. They shipped it to me and I just, presto, bingo, it's done. Same with that. Last time I bought a laptop, I think the moving from my old laptop to my new laptop was like a half an hour.
Yeah.
It used to be, oh, I'm getting a new laptop. I'm losing all of my data that's stuck on the old one.
Well, yeah, a lot of people today on the laptop, they're not supposed, like I remember when I was with P44, there was nothing on my laptop because the security protocol said everything has to be in a protected cloud environment. We don't want you to have something literally on the hard drive because that's not secure, right? So that's changing. I think probably because we've been talking for a while, the last point on the technology is, right, it's really around how do you create value? How do you also make it easy for your customers to adopt the technology? And by the way, don't forget, no matter how fast technology is evolving, adoption isn't that fast. And secondly, supply chains are continuously evolving. They're evolving faster than ever. So it's almost like you can keep adopting technology, but it's not like supply chain is staying the same, and so it's becoming easier because by the time you've implemented that part, something else has drastically changed. Now you need something else. That's why we're never 100% going to get there. But what we can do is we can use technology, one, to differentiate ourselves. Secondly, to become a lot more efficient. And thirdly, which again, I will say is maybe my number one, also position yourself to be able to get the best talent to come to your company. Because let me say this, if you're having old technology, you're trying to get the best young talent out of university come work for you, they will have one look at your technology and they'll say, no, thank you. It's like saying, hey, you're going to come work for my company. I'm going to give you a 1992 Nokia as your phone. They'll go, no, I want the latest and greatest iPhone. So look at it from that perspective as well. Technology is not just a tool to help you drive efficiency. It's a tool to work better and streamline also how you work with your customers, how you work with your employees, and how you get the better employees. And because that's the biggest complaint I hear from students. We heard so much about AI and APIs at school, and we go to these companies and it's all Access databases and Excel spreadsheets, Joe. That's what you hear. The reality hits hard.
Yeah. And by the way, that applies double to your warehouse. You would never suggest a young person, work in a warehouse that doesn't have cool tech, because otherwise you're just a strong back who can walk around for 8 hours a day.
Yeah. But I will say, suggestion, if you are a student in supply chain, go do a summer job in a warehouse. You'll learn a lot. With technology or no technology, just learn it, because that's how you see the movement of freight going in and out. And that's actually how you can tell that having access to the right data in a warehouse definitely helps you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to try and summarize what we talked about. I'm talking, and then I want to get your
Good
final
luck with
thoughts,
that, Joe.
Bart. So I'm talking to my friend Bart de Muynck, and we're talking about CHAINge, and that's CHAINge, CHAINGE, and that's a conference that Bart is. What are you, the chair? Is that
I'm
the
the
title?
chair of the conference, and it's change as in supply chain. It's no funny thing to say change, but with AI from artificial intelligence. Nothing. It's supply chain and the change we're making, hence change.
So, by the way, I'll make sure we put a link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website. Any of the links you give me, we'll put in the show notes. And I'll look for that article that Craig Fuller wrote about Project 44. So again, I'm talking to my friend Bart. We're talking about CHAINge, AI, and the future of freight. So we did talk about the conference, and that is coming up September 9th and 10th in Columbus, Ohio. That is a huge supply chain hub, and it's going to become even a bigger supply chain hub. The weather will be beautiful in September 9th and 10th. It is a college town. I would highly recommend you get there. Next, we talked about talent, and you said all of your travels, you've been to Europe, you've been all over lately, and everybody's talking about talent, not AI. And we've kind of jumped to the next cool thing, which is AI, and we need to focus more on talent. And that younger generation, there's fewer of them. They're better educated, they're wealthier, they're bigger on tech than ever before, and they have choices. They will not take a job where you say, hey, you got to pay your dues. You're going to be grinding away in Excel spreadsheets and doing data entry. They won't come. I mean, some will, but that you're not going to get the very best talent if you're not going to provide a job that is worthy of them.
Just one thing, Joe. I will say they talk too much about technology, not enough about talent, right? That's why I bring it up, because technology without the talent is not going to work. It's creating the right intersection between the two is truly making you successful.
Yes. And that old saying is, you will not be replaced by AI. You'll be replaced by a person using AI. And I think, at least in the beginning, from what I understand, we will be the supervisors and managers of AI. There will be workflows that you're responsible for. And by the way, we still need a human to blame and potentially fire if that AI isn't working properly.
Yeah, it's hard to fire a computer, right? That's why when you talk robots, you can talk artificial intelligence, because you're changing the person. I like to use the term AI augmented intelligence. It's still the human, but you're given the tools to augment their capability.
Yes, talent is more important than ever. And by the way, we talked about young people. I will talk also about the older people. We have a ton of great talent that is retiring, and the people have more money than ever before, and they can retire. A lot of people who are still hanging around because they enjoy working. I think we're going to have to find alternative ways to work with people, whether they're a driver that you really like, who only wants to work 6 months a year. Do it. Somewhere along the line, somebody said 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. I think we're going to make accommodations for parents, people who, for whatever reason, have a different lifestyle, who say, I don't want to work in the summer when my kids are home. I think we need to open our minds to what talent wants. And by the way, with the way computers and our phones and everything else works, doesn't really matter where they're at. And I know we've gotten away from remote work, but I do think we have to really think, what does the very best talent want? Not just money-wise, but lifestyle-wise. Because I think if you can capture someone with the lifestyle, you're going to be way ahead of the game. Last but not least, we had a long talk about the changes that are coming in technology, especially related to AI. We talked about Project 44. Project 44 changed the game when they brought in visibility. I don't know how many years ago, but it changed everything on my podcast. 50 companies in a row wanted to talk about visibility tools. And now they're changing it again with kind of I don't know, how would you describe it? What kind of platform?
Decision intelligence platform. And again, it's an evolution, right? So it's not a change. It's no going away from the original vision. If you talk, and hope you get a chance to talk to Jet, and you'll hear what his original vision is. That was always the vision. The thing is, you have to start collecting the data, and you also have to obviously give technology the time to catch up, because we have so much data. We finally are getting to the level where AI is smart enough to deal with all the data. We did even 5 years ago. We couldn't do what we can do today.
So they're not upending what they do. They're going to continue doing what they do. This is an evolution of the product. And by the way, we all want an evolution of the product. I think initially they were just saying, well, we're over the road domestic, and then all of a sudden they were global. I mean, it seemed like that happened overnight.
Well, remember in 2016, right, when you had no idea where a truck was, and you show where the truck was on the map, people go like, this is genius. Today is the status quo. It's the minimum required capability. So that's normal. I think that's normal. You have to evolve from that. The worst that you can do is not evolving. And I think what they do very well is listening to their customers, talking to their advisors, really understanding what is the true need in the market, and how do we create continuously more value also with the existing customers. So that's where all of this evolution to this new platforms come.
And by the way, not just anybody can do this, because to get what they have now, they have made acquisitions, they made upgrades, upgrade after. I mean, you were there for a while. I know you're still close to them. They were running fast. So
look at it, Joe, like a telecom company, right? Everyone can start a new cell phone service, but you won't have the 5G infrastructure that these existing providers have. So the only way that you would be able to start that phone company is if you can leverage the existing infrastructure, which obviously the vendors in this space will do. That's really where a lot of the investment went in. It's creating the networks, creating the data, and we know how segmented logistics is, right? Globally. I mean, one region alone is mind-blowing, right? Over 1 million fleets in the US alone. look at that from a global perspective across modes, it's just incredibly complex and incredibly hard to do.
I love it. I love it. So put a big old bow on this one. I know we talked about a whole lot, but put a big old bow on this, Bart de Muynck. Final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I would say spend enough time, whether you're a leader, whether you're a manager, whatever it is, or if you're an employee, around training. Train your people. If you want to use AI, the best thing is to give training around what AI is, how you're going to use it, how it really helps people, and then turn that into upskilling your people and empowering your people, because your people are also your resource to say, hey, we do this every day. We have an idea of how we can make this better. So by really creating a culture of innovation, I think is the way forward to creating the best supply chains, but also being able to set the stage to get the best talent out there to want to come and work for your organization. And one quick reference I'll make with that, and I'll hand it back over to Joe, because you talked about automotive. A few years ago, I was at a conference. It was all about autonomous vehicles. And there was a lot of the new vendors out there, and there was also a lot of the established automotive manufacturers out there. There was a professor there, and he said, okay, I have a lot of students that are graduating this year. They have a short list of companies they want to go work for. And he looked right in the audience and he said, and by the way, and he looked at the General Motors and the Fords and all those companies, said, none of you are on that list. So how do you create an established technology in industries that are a little bit more maybe viewed as old fashioned? How do you create that right culture of innovation to continue bringing in the best talent so you can become and remain the kind of leader in your industry?
I love it. I love it. So Bart, talk about your businesses. Before we hit record, you were telling me, I know you write a lot of articles, you do some webinars, you do a whole bunch of different things. You're an advisor to a number of firms. Talk about what you do and who you do it for.
Yeah, so as Bart de Muynck LLC, as you're correct, I'm an advisor. I work a lot with companies, mainly supply chain technology companies, from early startups, some of them even pre-revenue, all the way to large established companies. My largest customer is Manhattan Associates, and everyone in the middle there. I help them all the way from thought leadership to marketing to connection to my network of potential customers, creating partnerships for the smaller companies, introductions to venture capital. I do a lot of work with venture capital that are investing in supply chain technology, advising them around overall the industry, but also specific companies of interest in there. And as you mentioned, I do a lot of writing, research, articles. And so I also have a separate website. It's not a separate business. It's my thought leadership website, bettersupplychains.com. Again, my goal is to do my contribution to help make supply chains better through the information that I provide. So anyone can go on bettersupplychains.com and read my articles, and you will also end up seeing this podcast appearing on that website.
There you go. So if somebody wants to work with you, what kind of companies are you looking to work with?
Anyone that really has kind of a differentiated product in supply chain tech. I will always say I have three very simple rules. I only work with businesses I believe in. I only work with people that I like. And also, none of my customers can be competitors. Now, I know in supply chain, there's often quite a bit of overlap, but I use it as a rule. If I already have a TMS customer, I'm not going to do any work with an existing TMS competitor.
I love that. I heard Warren Buffett years ago, somebody said something about, you seem to work with an awful lot of your friends. And he said, yeah, what's the sense in being rich if I have to work with people I don't like?
You're absolutely right. And you have that
life is too short.
I know you have that saying behind you, right, on the canvas. It's true. I will say a lot of people that I work with.
Oh, so it says the ultimate luxury is time spent with friends and family.
And I have the good fortune that a lot of people that I also work with on an ongoing basis, I would consider them friends. So even if we wouldn't do business, they would still be friends. And I think that's truly, like you're saying, it is a luxury to be able to do that, right? And I know it's sometimes the saying that we hear is like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I have the good fortune. I think when you go older, and I was saying that on Wednesday at an event, what I have is I don't have the power of youth. I have the power of older age. And when they see you and then they look at you, you're a little bit older, they go, oh, you must have a lot of experience, right? and that's the great thing, to then say, oh, I can do something like that because I lived through it in different roles and work with people. I also do, and that's not paid, but I love working with universities, go and speak at universities, speaking to the students, because I think us old timers, it's I would say our responsibility to what we have learned to also share that with the next generation, to help educate them. That's why I love being at conferences. That's why I like being chair at conferences, because I feel it's one way of giving back. It's something that became more important, I think, when I turned 50. Instead of just saying what's good for Bart de Muynck, is what role can Bart de Muynck play in giving back to the industry.
I know. My podcast is listened to by students because it's assigned to them. So I get a fair amount of phone calls saying, hey, my professor said I had to listen to this and I had a question. I was like, well, then listen to it.
Yeah, I have actually, through webinars and through some of these podcasts, I have people reach out to me through LinkedIn, and I've done interviews with people because they're writing an essay or they're writing their final paper, or I have professors inviting me to come and speak. And when possible, obviously, I'm always going to do that. I think it's very rewarding, right? Because there's some things you can monetize and there's some things you do because you know they're valuable for other folks.
Yes, exactly. I spoke to a university class last year for a friend, and then when we were done, I said, I feel like there wasn't enough questions. She said, that's the liveliest conversation we've had here. She goes, Joe, they didn't look at their phone nearly as much. I go, oh, okay. I was like, I had higher expectations, I guess. But yeah, you know what? It's always the job of, as you get older, to adjust to whatever the next generation's doing, because the one I'm part of is running out. Anyway, what I'll do, Bart, is I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website. Any other links you give me, I will put in the show notes so we can, anyone who wants to reach out and talk to you can do so. And thank you so much for taking the time. I know taking a lot of your time this afternoon. I appreciate you taking the time with
Joe,
me.
appreciate it. Always great being on the podcast, and always great having a one-on-one conversation with you.
Yep. Excellent. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.